If you've been thinking about listing your land or commercial property and you're wondering what the process actually looks like, not the glossy version, the real week by week picture of what actually happens the day you sign the listing agreement to the day you close, this video is for you. One of the biggest things I hear from sellers is that they didn't feel informed during the process. They didn't know what was happening, they didn't know when it was happening, and they didn't know what they were supposed to be doing. That's not how I work, and it's not how this is gonna go for you. I'm Trent Babb with Ranch Roads Land and Commercial, and I specialize in land and commercial in Central Texas. And I'm gonna go through the entire listing process, what I'm doing, what you're doing, and what to expect from the buyers, and how we get from a signed listing agreement to a closed deal. So let's get into it. Now the work starts before the property ever hits the market. This is the week that we build the foundation that everything else runs on. And quite frankly, it's one of the most important parts of the entire process. And here's what's happening during that first week. First is the paperwork. We'll execute the listing agreement. In Texas, it's a farm and ranch listing agreement, exclusive right to sell, commercial listing agreement, unimproved listing agreement, or even a residential listing agreement. Promulgated by the Texas Association of Realtors, basically saying that the contract was written by a licensed attorney. This is the document that appoints me as your sole and exclusive agent and gives me the authority to market the property on your behalf. We'll go through it together so you know exactly what you're signing, what the listing period looks like, how my compensation is dispersed, and what both of us are committing to. Now, I want to spend a minute on one thing in that agreement that is sometimes surprises sellers, which is the listing period. This is the negotiated window of time that I have to sell your property. Now, with land, that usually takes a little bit longer than just a normal residential contract. So I usually recommend at least 6 months, sometimes longer, depending on the property type, the price point, and the buyer pool that we're targeting. The right buyer isn't always in the market today. Sometimes we're building the audience while the property is live. A realistic time period gives us the runway to do this properly. Now, before anything goes public, we sit down and talk about price. I'll pull comparable sales, actual closed transactions on similar land in your area. Not Zillow estimates, not what a neighbor thinks the property is worth, real comps with the same type of characteristics as your property has. We look at the price per acre, how long those properties sat on the market, and what the buyer pool looked like, and what's currently on the market that a buyer might compare your property to. Then we set a listing price that's competitive, defensible, and positions your property to attract serious buyers, not just tire kickers. Now, this gets scheduled within the first week and typically happens within 7 to 10 days. We coordinate timing around the weather or lightning, the golden hour if possible. How your property looks in the first moment of exposure matters enormously. First impressions online happen in seconds, and we don't get a second chance at them. Now, while the marketing is being built, I need certain documents from you. A current survey, if one exists, your deed, information about any existing leases on the property, whether that's surface lease or a mineral lease, any government programs, agreements, any taxes exemptions that you have, any information to disclose. The more organized we are on the front end, the smoother everything goes once we're under contract. Now, once the drone footage is back, edited, and the motion graphics are layered in, the boundary overlays, the access details, the parcel information, we're ready to go live. This usually happens around the end of week 1 or the beginning of week 2. And here's what I launch simultaneously. Number 1, the MLS listing. So under the Texas Association of Realtors listing agreement, your property must be filed with the MLS within 5 days of the listing start date, unless we've agreed otherwise in writing. The MLS syndicates out to land-specific platforms, real estate aggregators, and gets in front of buyers agents who are actively working with clients looking for exactly what your property has. Now, I do want to mention one option some sellers ask about, which is the delayed MLS filing. This listing agreement does allow for a delayed filing for a specific time for a legitimate reason. Some sellers prefer to do a pre-market period to test pricing or reach a specific buyer pool before going fully public. This is a conversation we have depending on your situation and your goals. Now, this is where my marketing approach is fundamentally different than a standard listing. Before the ads go live, I've already mapped out the buyer persona for your specific property, meaning who is this property actually built for? A rancher looking to expand, a developer scouting commercial properties, a cash investor looking to build their portfolio, a recreational buyer looking for hunting acreage. Now, once I know who we're targeting, I build specific campaigns on YouTube, Google, Facebook, and Instagram using specific search terms and keywords that type of buyer is already using. So your property doesn't get broadcasted to just everyone. It gets placed in front of the buyer who most likely want it. That's the difference between reach and precision. Now, I maintain a list of active land buyers, investors, and industry contacts who hear about new properties before they ever hit the open market. When your listing goes live, they get notified first. Video content, property features, aerial highlights, these go out across my social media platforms as an ongoing content strategy built to keep your property visible and in front of the right audience throughout the listing period. Now, once the property is live, showings start coming in, and here's how I handle them. Every buyer who requests a showing gets pre-qualified before they ever set foot on your property. I'm not sending strangers out to walk your property without understanding who they are, whether they have the financial ability to even purchase the property, or whether the property is a genuinely good fit for that buyer. You probably know this, but some sellers need to be told that typically with Royal Land, you aren't present for the showing. Buyers walk the property more honestly when the seller isn't standing right next to them. I accompany serious buyers on showings when it makes sense, and I'm always available to answer any questions and provide information in real time. After every showing, I follow up with the buyer or the buyer's agent after feedback. Some of that feedback is useful. It tells us how the property is being evaluated and received. It also lets us know the common questions that are being brought up, whether that's anything about the marketing or the pricing that needs to be adjusted. I share that information with you so that you're never left out wondering what buyers are saying about your property. Communication is something I take very seriously. You'll hear me on a regular basis. I get some sellers saying, hey, you don't need to contact me every week or every month about this. But other sellers are different, not just when there's news, but consistently throughout the listing period. Sometimes I'll just text you and say, hey, there's nothing to update you with. I hope you have a good day. You shouldn't have to, I just don't believe that you should have to chase your agent for an update. That's not how this should work. Now, when a buyer or buyer's agent does submit an offer, I present it to you either through video or personally, and we go through it together. Every relevant term, not just the price. Now, of course, price matters, but every seller is different, and on land deals, there are other terms within the contract that matter just as much. So one is earnest money. How much is the buyer putting down? A stronger earnest money deposit signals a more serious buyer. On the flip side, a low earnest money offer on a high valued property is worth taking note. Now, the option period. How many days are they asking for? This is their window to perform their due diligence and terminate for any reason. During the option period, your property is effectively off the market. A longer option period and they're trying to present a lower option fee is something that won't take place with me, and that's something that we will negotiate. Now, the option fee. A lot of people get this confused with the earnest money, and this is the non-refundable fee. The buyer pays you directly for their right to terminate the property for whatever reason. Unlike the earnest money, once deposited to the title company, you are able to go get that money at any point, regardless of the outcome. In Texas contracts, if the buyer does not deliver the option fee within 3 days of the effective date, they lose the unrestricted right to terminate. Now, let's go over financing versus cash. A cash offer with a short closing timeline is generally stronger than a financed offer at the same price. But a financed buyer with strong qualifications and reasonable contingencies is still a solid offer. But we'll have to evaluate the full picture. Closing date. Does the timeline work for you? Are there lease obligations, tax considerations, or personal circumstances that affect when you need or want to close? And what conveys? On a farm and ranch contract, this matters because of the accessories, improvements, or any equipment like a tractor or plow or hunting blinds, game feeders, livestock equipment. irrigation systems. These can all be negotiated within the contract. Now, once we reviewed everything, the full picture, you have 3 choices, which is accept, reject, or counter. Now, I'll give you my honest feedback about how to approach the next step and what I think the right move is, but the decision is always yours. Now, once you accept an offer, the contract is executed. Your role as a seller shifts. Here's what's happening during that time period and what I need from you. Now, the buyer has the option period to conduct due diligence. During this window, you may have inspectors, surveyors, or the buyer themselves accessing the property, showing up with the inspector or the surveyor. Now, under the listing agreement, you've authorized reasonable access for these purposes. So keep the property acceptable and be responsive if any questions come up about the land. Now, if a survey is being ordered and you have an existing survey, get it to me immediately, preferably those 2 weeks before we go live with your property, so that we can immediately deliver it to the buyer and the title company within the time frame required on the contract. The title company is going to reach out to you for information and signatures during this time period. Respond to them promptly. Delays in seller-sided documents and signatures to the title company are one of the most common reasons closings get pushed. If the buyer raises objections about the title commitment or the survey, we'll work through them together. Some objections are easy to resolve, and some require a little more digging and work. A few are deal breakers, and if that happens, we'll walk through them together. One important thing to know as a seller, during the option period, while the buyer has the unrestricted right to terminate, your property is essentially on hold. It is off the market. This is why negotiating a reasonable option period length and the appropriate option fee matters. This is why I will continue marketing the property and present any backup offers to you if they come in. Because until that option period expires and the buyers remove their right to terminate the property, nothing is guaranteed. Now, as we approach the closing date, there's a few things that need your attention. One is the deed. The title company will prepare a general warranty deed conveying the title to the buyer. You'll need to review that and sign this prior to closing. The deed needs to accurately reflect what's being conveyed, like the land, the improvements, accessories, or any reservations retaining such as the mineral rights or water rights. The title company will pull tax certificates confirming there are no delinquent taxes on the property. If there are any outstanding taxes, those will be resolved out of the closing proceeds. Now, your property taxes will be prorated for the current year to the closing date. If the closing happens to happen mid-year, then you're responsible for those taxes up to that date, and the buyer takes on the rest. Now, same with any surface leases that convey, say like grazing or hunting leases, those rents will be prorated as well. Now, this one is worth knowing if your property carries an agricultural exemption. If the buyer intends to use the property in a way that removes the ag exemption, rollback taxes are then triggered. The allocation of rollback tax responsibility is negotiable. Make sure you understand how this contract is written on this point before closing. Now, under the contract, you deliver possession of the property to the buyer at closing. I want to point that out because a lot of people think that the deed is done once closing, once you sign the papers at the title company, but it's not completed until funding happens. That may happen on that day, depending on what time you close, or the following day. So make sure anything retaining equipment, personal property, anything listed on the exclusions is removed before that date. Now, closing day for a seller is typically straightforward. There's a lot less paperwork to be signed, especially if everything is well handled leading up to the closing. You'll go to the title company, or you can sign remotely if that's been arranged, or the closing officer, and they'll help you work through the documents. You'll sign the general warranty deed conveying title to the buyer. The closing officer will walk you through each one of those documents. Now, once the buyer's funds are confirmed and dispersed, proceeds are distributed. Your loan payoff, if there is one, gets handled out of closing, and the title company prepares that before closing. My compensation comes out of the proceeds as well per the listing agreement, and what's left is your net. And the title company will wire that to you or cut you a check, however that's arranged. Now, once the deed is recorded with the county, the transaction is complete and the property has a new owner. or a couple of things to take care of after you close. Keep a copy of your closing disclosure and settlement statement for your records. You'll need these for tax purposes. The sale of land has capital gains implications, and your CPA is going to want details on your cost basis, closing costs, and net proceeds. If you've been carrying an agricultural exemption on the property, you must notify the county appraisal district that the property has been sold. The exemption transfers with the land under the new owner's name, but the appraisal district must be notified. Now, if you have any other land or other property or future real estate decisions ahead of you, I'd love to continue to be your resource. That relationship doesn't end at the closing table. Selling land the right way takes preparation, patience, and the marketing approach that puts your property in front of the right buyer, not just any buyer. That's what this process is designed to do. If you own land or commercial property and you're starting to think what selling might look like, the best first step is to have a conversation. A listing appointment with me is completely free. We'll look at your property together, talk you through the numbers, and I'll show you exactly how I'd approach marketing your property. The link to book an appointment is in the description below. I've also got it pinned to the comments. So no pressure, no obligations, just a real conversation about your land and what's possible. I appreciate you watching this video. We'll see you on the next one.